The cafe was alive with the usual morning rush. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with warm bread and pastries filled the air. People were chatting softly at small tables, some hunched over laptops, others scrolling on their phones. Outside, the city street buzzed with life. Cars honking, people walking quickly to work, the occasional cyclist weaving through the crowd. Inside the small cafe was a world of its own, cozy and busy at the same time. She moved quietly among the tables, carrying plates of breakfast, cups of steaming coffee, and trays stacked with muffins and croissants. Her steps were soft, careful, practiced. She had been working here for a few years now, and every movement seemed automatic, almost like a dance. She greeted customers with a polite smile, nodded when someone thanked her, and remembered the regulars' orders without being asked. People noticed her efficiency, her calm presence, but few really saw her. She was there, always helpful, always quiet, and somehow almost invisible to the world around her. Behind the counter, she washed dishes and polished glasses with her usual precision. Her hands moved quickly, almost rhythmically, as she scrubbed and rinsed as if the motion itself was part of some hidden pattern only she could see. Sometimes, while drying a cup or arranging cutlery, she would hum softly. It wasn't loud enough to disturb anyone, just a gentle tune that floated through the background like a whisper. Most people never noticed, but it was a habit she couldn't stop. Music had always been a part of her life, even if no one here knew it. She had never spoken much about her past. To the few coworkers who tried to get to know her, she was polite, but she kept her personal life close to her chest. She lived alone in a small apartment not far from the cafe, a place filled with books, sheets of music, and a single, well-worn piano in the corner. Every night after work, she would return to that apartment, and it became her sanctuary. There she could let go of the world outside, and the music could pour out of her without judgment, without interruption. Her life seemed ordinary to anyone looking from the outside. She woke up early, worked long hours, and went home to a quiet apartment. Sometimes she met friends for coffee or walked in the park nearby, but mostly she kept to herself. Yet beneath this calm, ordinary exterior there was a fire, a hidden passion, a talent that had been nurtured in private for many years. She had been trained since childhood, learning to play different instruments, reading sheet music long before most of her peers could. But life had a way of demanding practicality. She had put that dream on hold, taking jobs that paid the bills, keeping her music as a secret only she could enjoy. The cafe was her stage in small, unnoticed ways. She tapped her fingers to imaginary rhythms while taking orders, hummed melodies that no one else could hear, and sometimes, when a song came to mind, she would quietly whistle a note or two, testing the harmony. She had learned to keep her talent hidden, almost like a secret treasure that only she knew existed. The morning passed quickly, the cafe filled and emptied in a steady rhythm. She moved through it all, smiling, nodding, making sure every customer felt attended to, every order correct. There were moments when her mind wandered. She imagined herself playing in a grand concert hall, the music rising around her, the audience silent, captivated. She had dreamed about that moment countless times, yet never imagined it could happen. A young man at the corner table caught her attention. He was a regular, always sitting with a sketchbook and pencil, drawing quietly while drinking his coffee. He often looked up when she passed by, giving a small nod or a smile. Today he paused mid-sketch and whispered something to himself. She didn't hear it clearly, but she noticed the slight frown on his face and the way he tapped his pencil, almost in time with her quiet humming. She glanced down at her tray and then back at him. "Would you like another coffee?" she asked gently. He looked up surprised. "Oh yes, please, thank you." She set the cup down and smiled. There was something about him, something observant, noticing the small details that others missed, like the way she hummed or tapped her fingers. She wondered briefly if he had ever thought there was more to her than just a waitress. The cafe bell rang as a new group of customers entered, breaking her thoughts. She moved to greet them, and her world returned to its familiar rhythm. Orders were taken, coffee poured, plates carried. She noticed the laughter of a little girl sitting with her parents, the way a man's tie was crooked, the soft music playing from the cafe speakers. Every small detail was observed, catalogued in her mind, often serving as inspiration for music she would play later in private. During a brief break, she stepped into the small kitchen at the back and leaned against the counter, taking a moment to breathe. She closed her eyes and let her mind wander, imagining the notes and chords that had been lingering in her thoughts all morning. Her fingers twitched slightly as if they wanted to play, even without an instrument. Music was a part of her being, inseparable from her identity. Yet, she kept it hidden because the world outside the cafe had no room for her talent. People valued practicality over dreams, orders over melodies, appearances over hidden depths. A co-worker appeared beside her, carrying a mop and bucket. "Hey, you okay?" "You look lost in thought again." She smiled politely. "I'm fine. Just taking a quick break." He nodded, satisfied, and went on his way. He didn't know, and she didn't tell. Most of the people around her didn't notice the depth beneath her calm exterior. She had grown used to that. In a way, it was comforting. Her talent was hers alone, safe from judgment, safe from expectation. As the afternoon approached, the cafe slowed slightly. The rush had passed, leaving a gentle hum of conversation and the occasional clinking of cups. She carried a tray of desserts to a table near the window and paused for a moment. Sunlight streamed in, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. She breathed deeply, enjoying the small moment of peace amidst the routine. Her thoughts drifted again to music. She imagined herself performing in front of people who would truly listen, people who would understand the story in every note. She imagined the applause, the silence between pieces, the way music could touch hearts in ways words never could. But she shook her head softly, bringing herself back to the present. That life seemed far away, almost like a dream she had no right to pursue. The door opened, letting in a gust of wind and a group of tourists who looked around eagerly. She moved to greet them, taking orders with her usual efficiency. One of them, a young woman, noticed her humming under her breath. "That's a beautiful tune," she said softly. She froze for a moment, startled by the recognition. "Oh, thank you," she replied quietly, looking down at her tray. She had never played for anyone, never let anyone hear more than a fleeting note. Compliments were rare, and they always made her heart race in a strange mix of pride and fear. The woman smiled and returned to her group. She watched them settle at a table, carrying their drinks and pastries. Her mind raced with the thought that someone, somewhere, had actually noticed. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if people could hear the music she kept locked away. The afternoon passed with the same quiet rhythm. She refilled drinks, cleared tables, and shared polite words with customers. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, but inside she created her own small universe of order and care. Every movement, every glance, every hum was part of a delicate balance that she maintained effortlessly. As evening approached, the cafe began to empty. She cleaned tables, swept the floor, and finally returned behind the counter to wash dishes and organize for the next day. The soft glow of the cafe lights reflected off the polished surfaces, casting a warm golden hue over the room. She paused for a moment, leaning against the counter and closing her eyes. The cafe was quiet now, filled only with the faint echo of her footsteps and the distant sounds of the city outside. In that silence, she let her fingers tap softly on the counter, tracing patterns in the rhythm of an imaginary song. She hummed, barely audible, testing chords and melodies in her mind. This was her true world, the one that existed beyond the eyes of customers and coworkers. This was where her heart truly lived, in the music she could feel but could not yet share. She straightened, taking a deep breath, and smiled faintly. The cafe might not know her secrets, the city might not see her talent, but she knew. She knew the depth of her own music, the power it held, and the story it could tell. One day, she thought quietly, maybe the world would listen. But for now, she was content to move through her ordinary life with extraordinary music, quietly hidden within her. The night settled in, and she finally closed the cafe door behind her. The streets were emptying, and the city lights reflected on wet pavement from a recent rain. She walked home slowly, thinking of the piano waiting in her apartment, the sheet music scattered on the floor, the melodies she longed to play. Tomorrow would be another day of coffee, plates, and polite smiles, but tonight, she could let her music breathe. Tonight she could dream, and in that quiet, solitary walk through the streets, the waitress carried with her a secret brilliance, a hidden maestro waiting for the world to finally hear her voice. The morning sunlight spilled into the cafe, casting soft golden light across the tables. The usual hum of the city was there outside, but inside the cafe felt so hot. This was a chance. Not a big chance, Not something that would make her famous, but a chance to let her music exist outside the walls of her apartment, outside the small, quiet world she had created. The thought both excited and frightened her. She had hidden her talent for so long, carefully keeping it private. The idea of playing in front of strangers made her pulse quicken. Throughout the day, she kept thinking about the event. She imagined the small stage, the microphone, the rows of chairs waiting for an audience. She pictured herself walking up, taking a deep breath, and letting the music flow naturally from her fingers. But doubt crept in immediately. What if she made a mistake? What if no one appreciated it? The fear of embarrassment gnawed at her, but it did not completely outweigh the curiosity, the urge to see what might happen if she finally let the music out. During a break, she sat in the small kitchen at the back of the cafe, tracing patterns on the table with her fingers. She imagined herself performing a piece she had practiced countless times, a melody that had taken years to perfect. Her heart beat faster at the thought of sharing it. She realized that she had been waiting for a moment like this her entire life, though she had not known it. The quiet evenings spent practicing, the secret hours at her piano, they had been preparation for something she had not yet dared to face. Her thoughts were interrupted by a regular customer, an older man who often came for his morning coffee. He noticed her deep in thought and gave a small smile. "You look like you're thinking about something wonderful," he said. She smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. "Just thinking," she said softly, and he nodded, satisfied with the answer. As the day went on, she could hardly focus on the tasks at hand. The idea of performing, even in a small local setting, filled her mind. She imagined the audience leaning forward, curious, listening closely to every note. She imagined the music rising and falling, carrying emotions she had always kept bottled inside. She imagined for the first time what it would feel like to share that secret part of herself with the world. After her shift, she returned to her small apartment. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the evening lamp. She walked to the piano, fingers brushing over the keys. She hesitated, then sat down and let her hands move over the familiar patterns. The notes filled the room, gentle at first, then stronger, more confident. She closed her eyes and let the music take over, imagining the audience from the flyer, imagining the applause, imagining the moment when people realized the depth of her talent. Hours passed without her noticing. She stopped only when her fingers ached and the notes lingered in the air like a soft mist. Sitting back, she realized something had changed. The music no longer felt like a secret she was hiding. It felt like a gift she wanted to share. The fear of judgment was still there, but it was smaller now, overshadowed by the thrill of possibility. The next morning, she returned to the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose. The routine was the same. Orders taken, coffee poured, plates carried. But beneath her calm exterior, something had shifted. Her steps were lighter, her smiles more genuine. There was a quiet confidence now, born not from the world noticing her, but from the knowledge that she was ready to step forward. During the late morning lull, she pulled the flyer from her apron pocket and examined it again. The event was in a few days. A small stage, a few chairs, nothing grand, but it was enough. She began to make a mental list of pieces she could perform, the melodies she had practiced alone in her apartment. She considered each one carefully, imagining how it would sound to strangers, how it might make them feel. Some pieces were technical, showing her skill, while others were softer, more emotional, reflecting the depth of feeling she rarely shared with anyone. Her co-workers noticed her distraction. One of them, cheerful and talkative, leaned over. "Hey, you're quiet today. What's going on in that head of yours?" She smiled politely. "Just thinking about something," she replied, careful not to reveal too much. The co-worker shrugged and moved on. She was grateful for their curiosity, but she was not ready to share her plans yet. This was her decision and it needed to be hers alone. She wanted the music to speak for her, not her words. After work, she walked home slowly, carrying the flyer carefully in her pocket. The city was alive with evening sounds, children laughing, cars passing, people walking dogs. She thought about the performance again, imagining the small stage set up with a microphone, the audience waiting quietly, the soft glow of the lights. She imagined herself taking a deep breath, letting the music flow, and feeling it connect with people who had no idea what she had been keeping hidden all these years. That night, she returned to her piano and began to practice deliberately, not just for herself, but as if preparing for someone else to hear her, to understand the music she had nurtured in secret. She played slowly at first, testing each note, ensuring it conveyed the emotion she wanted. Then she played faster, letting the rhythm take over, letting the melodies rise and fall naturally. She felt alive in a way she rarely did, a feeling that was both exhilarating and frightening. The next day, she spoke quietly to herself while arranging her sheet music. "I can do this," she whispered. The words felt strange, almost foreign, but also empowering. She realized that this small performance could change everything. Not her life in a grand sense, but her life in the way that mattered most. It could allow her to step out of the shadows even for a moment, and let the music speak for her. As the day of the event approached, she practiced more, refining each piece, imagining the audience's reactions, imagining the music reaching them in ways words never could. She balanced her routine at the cafe with her private rehearsals, careful not to tire herself out, careful not to reveal her excitement to anyone else. Every time she hummed a melody while serving coffee, she felt a small thrill, a taste of what it would feel like to play for others. On the day of the event, she woke earlier than usual, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She dressed simply, carefully, making sure she was comfortable but presentable. The cafe would be busy as usual, but she barely noticed the morning rush. Her mind was on the evening, on the small stage, on the chance to share the music she had kept hidden for so long. After her shift, she returned to her apartment and set her sheet music carefully on the piano. She practiced each piece one last time, letting the notes flow naturally, feeling every chord and every pause. She imagined the audience sitting quietly, listening closely, feeling the story she told through each melody. She felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration, knowing that this moment could change everything, at least in a small but meaningful way. Evening came, and she carried her small bag with sheet music and a notebook to the community hall. The streets were quiet compared to the city's usual chaos, and the hall itself was modest, with simple wooden chairs and a small bare stage. A few people were already there, chatting softly, setting up instruments, arranging the space. She took a deep breath and walked in, trying to blend in, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. As she waited for her turn, she watched other performers. Some were confident, some were nervous, but all seemed comfortable in the spotlight in a way she had never experienced. She felt her palms grow sweaty, her heart racing, but she reminded herself of the hours she had spent practicing, of the music that had been a constant companion throughout her life. This was her moment, small though it was, to finally step into the light. When her name was called, she walked toward the stage with careful steps, carrying only her sheet music and a quiet determination. The room fell slightly silent as people turned to watch her. She placed the music on the stand, adjusted the microphone, and took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys she would play, the notes familiar yet somehow more alive in this moment. The room fell quiet the moment she touched the keys. The first notes were soft, like whispers, uncertain yet filled with emotion. The sound floated through the air, wrapping the small hall in a stillness no one had expected. She had imagined this moment so many times, yet now that it was happening, everything felt distant, almost unreal. Her hands moved on their own, guided by years of practice, guided by something deeper than thought, by feeling. Every chord carried a piece of her story. The audience didn't know her name, didn't know that she worked in a small cafe serving coffee every day, or that she spent her nights alone with her piano. They didn't know the quiet struggles, the endless hours of doubt, the way she'd almost given up on her dream long ago. But they could feel it. They could sense that behind every note was something real. At first, the crowd seemed unsure. They had listened politely to all the performers before her, applauding after each piece. But something about this one was different. Her playing was not loud or showy. It was quiet but full of meaning, each note connected to the next like a thread weaving a story that no words could tell. Slowly, people began to lean forward in their seats. Conversation stopped. The air seemed to thicken with emotion. Her fingers moved with a kind of grace that came not from effort but from honesty. She wasn't performing to impress. She was simply sharing what had always been inside her. The melody rose and fell, gentle yet powerful, fragile yet unbreakable. She could feel her heart racing, but almost welcoming as the waitress moved among the customers. She carried trays of coffee and breakfast with her practiced ease, smiling politely when someone looked up at her, nodding when another thanked her. Her life felt routine, comfortable, yet a small restlessness had begun to stir inside her, a quiet longing she could not ignore. She had spent the night imagining music, the way it could fill a room, the way it could touch people she had never met. The thought lingered as she wiped a counter and stacked clean plates. The cafe was buzzing with customers now, and she moved like a shadow, efficient and careful. Yet her mind was elsewhere, caught in melodies no one could hear. She hummed a tune softly, almost without realizing it, tapping her fingers to a rhythm that had formed in her imagination the moment she woke. It was during the late morning lull that she first noticed the flyer on the bulletin board near the cafe entrance. A local community hall was hosting an evening event for amateur musicians. The sign was bright and colorful, announcing a small opportunity for anyone with musical talent to perform in front of a crowd. The idea made her stomach flutter. She stopped for a moment, fingers brushing over the flyer as if touching it could somehow make the event real. Her co-workers walked past, chatting about their weekends, unaware of her hesitation. She folded the flyer gently and tucked it into her apron pocket. Maybe she didn't stop. She let the music guide her, her emotions flowing freely for the first time in years. In one corner, an old man closed his eyes, his face softening as if remembering something long forgotten. A young girl beside him watched in awe, clutching her mother's arm. The audience was silent, completely drawn into the world she was creating. The soft glow of the stage lights reflected off the piano, casting a warm light across her focused face. She was no longer the quiet waitress who blended into the background. She was something else entirely. As the final notes faded, the silence that followed felt endless. She sat still for a moment, her hands trembling slightly over the keys. The sound of her heartbeat echoed in her ears. Then slowly applause began to spread through the room. It started softly. One pair of hands, then another, and then more. Within seconds, the hall was filled with applause that seemed to come from every corner. People stood up, clapping loudly, some cheering, some even whistling in amazement. She looked up, startled. Her eyes met faces glowing with admiration, people smiling at her, nodding, whispering to each other. She could hardly believe it. For so long she had lived in the shadows, convinced that her talent was meant to stay hidden. And now in this small community hall, strangers were standing and applauding her, not because they felt sorry for her, but because they were moved, truly moved, by what they had heard. Her throat tightened as she stood and bowed slightly. The warmth in the room felt almost unreal. It wasn't fame or glory that filled her heart. It was the simple joy of being seen, of being understood through her music. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. After her performance, several people came up to her. A middle-aged woman smiled kindly and said, "That was beautiful. I've never heard anything so heartfelt." A young boy holding a violin looked up at her shyly and whispered, "I want to play like you someday." She smiled at him, her heart swelling. Others asked where she had learned to play, if she was a professional, if she performed anywhere else. She shook her head, still overwhelmed, replying softly that she just played for herself, mostly at home. Their surprise was visible. Some couldn't believe that someone so talented worked in a cafe, hidden away from the world. As she stepped outside later that night, the cool air hit her face, but she didn't feel cold. Her chest was warm, full of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. She walked slowly through the quiet streets, the applause still echoing in her ears. The sound was not just appreciation, it was validation. It told her that what she carried inside, her passion, her music, truly mattered. When she reached home, she didn't turn on the lights right away. She walked to the piano and sat down in the dim glow from the window. Her fingers rested on the keys, still tingling from the performance. She played softly, replaying the same piece, but this time with a lightness she had never known. The fear that had always clung to her had loosened its grip. She thought about the faces in the audience and the tears, the smiles, the way they had listened so deeply. It reminded her that art, no matter how small or hidden, could reach people's hearts. She didn't need a grand stage or fame. She just needed to play. The next morning, when she arrived at the cafe, everything looked the same. The chatter, the aroma of coffee, the steady rhythm of cups and plates. But she felt different inside. Her co-workers noticed it too. One of them laughed and said, "You're glowing today. Something good happen?" She smiled quietly. "Maybe," she said. The day went by as usual, but there was a spark in her movements now. She felt lighter, freer. When she hummed softly while making coffee, it wasn't just out of habit. It was joy. The customers seemed to sense it too. The air around her carried a quiet warmth that spread through the cafe. Later in the day, one of the regular customers, the artist who often sat in the corner sketching, called her over. "I heard you performed at the community hall last night," he said. "My friend was there. He couldn't stop talking about you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Oh," she said softly, unsure how to respond. "He said your music made the whole room go silent," the artist continued, smiling. "You must have something special." She blushed slightly, looking down. "It was just a small event," she said modestly. He nodded. "Maybe, but sometimes small things change everything." His words stayed with her long after she walked away. For the first time, she began to see her own life from a different angle. Maybe she wasn't meant to stay hidden forever. Maybe the music inside her was never meant to be a secret. Over the next few days, word about her performance spread quietly around the neighborhood. People came into the cafe and whispered to each other. A few even asked her if she would play again. She didn't know what to say. The attention made her nervous but also excited. The idea that people wanted to hear her again filled her with a mix of pride and disbelief. One evening, as she walked home after another long shift, she stopped by the same community hall where she had performed. The lights were off and the hall was empty now, but she stood outside for a moment, remembering how it had felt. The warmth of the lights, the sound of the applause, the emotion that had filled the room. It had been real. For the first time, she felt that her dream was not impossible. It might be far, but it was no longer out of reach. At home, she opened her window and let the night breeze drift in. She sat at her piano again, and this time she didn't play from sheet music. She played freely, letting her fingers move wherever they wanted. The notes flowed gently like water, carrying her thoughts and feelings effortlessly. The melody was new, born from everything she had felt in the last few days, the fear, the courage, the joy, the hope. She thought about what music meant to her. It wasn't about recognition or applause. It was about connection, about sharing something true with others. It was about giving people a moment to feel, to remember, to dream. As she played, she realized something important. For years, she had believed that her life had to stay small, that her dreams belonged only in her imagination. But that night at the community hall had changed everything. It showed her that even in a world that often rushed past unnoticed people, there was still space for quiet beauty, for honest expression, for music that came straight from the heart. When the last note faded, she sat in silence for a long time. Her eyes welled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of gratitude. She finally felt seen, not as a waitress who served coffee every day, but as a person who carried something meaningful within her. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night stayed alive in her mind. People continued to talk about her performance, and sometimes strangers came into the cafe just to see her. Curious about the hidden Maestro, she remained humble, still serving coffee with her usual quiet grace, but there was now a quiet pride in her posture, a sparkle in her eyes. Sometimes, during slow afternoons, she would hum a melody softly, and people would stop talking for a moment to listen. The cafe owner even joked that she should perform there one evening, maybe during the weekend crowd. She laughed shyly, unsure if she could. But inside, the thought warmed her. Maybe one day she would. For now, she was content to let the music live in her. Not hidden anymore, but growing. Ready for the world whenever the world was ready to listen again. And as she closed up the cafe one quiet evening, she looked around at the place where her journey had begun. The tables, the customers, the soft music in the background, and she smiled. The ordinary life she had once thought so small had become something extraordinary, because now she knew that even the quietest voices could be heard, if only they had the courage to speak. That night, as she walked home under the city lights, her steps were light, almost musical. She didn't know where this new path would take her, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The world had hurt her once, and that was enough to change everything. The next morning, the small Café Beau said louder than ever before. It wasn't just the sound of the coffee machine or the chatter of customers. It was the whispers, the murmurs, the questions being passed around between every table. The story of the quiet waitress who had stunned everyone, with her performance had already begun to spread. through the town like wildfire. People who had never stepped foot in the cafe before came in, just to catch a glimpse of her. Some came out of curiosity, others out of admiration. Even the regular customers seemed to look at her differently now. But she didn't act any different. She still tied her apron the same way, still greeted everyone with her soft smile, and still carried trays carefully between the crowded tables. Inside, though, her world felt completely different. That night after her performance, she hadn't been able to sleep. She kept hearing the sound of applause echoing in her ears, louder than she'd ever imagined. It didn't feel real. For years, she had played her music in silence, afraid that it didn't matter, and now suddenly everyone wanted to know who she was. Her phone had lit up with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. A few local blogs had even written about her, calling her the hidden Maestro. She had laughed quietly when she read that name. Maestro. It felt too big for her. Too grand. She was just a girl who played music because she loved it. When she arrived at work that day, the cafe owner pulled her aside. "You were incredible last night," he said, still amazed. "People haven't stopped talking about it. You've got a gift. Don't hide it anymore." She smiled shyly, unsure what to say. Compliments always made her a little uncomfortable. She wasn't used to attention, and now it felt like a spotlight followed her everywhere she went. Throughout the morning, customers asked if she'd perform again. Some even offered to record her. Others wanted to know where they could hear more of her music. She didn't have an answer. Until that night, no one had even known she played. By the end of her shift, she was exhausted, not from the work, but from all the eyes that seemed to follow her. On her way home, she stopped at a quiet park and sat on a bench. The autumn air was cool, and the faint sound of city traffic hummed in the distance. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to let everything sink in. She took out her small notebook, one she had filled with handwritten songs over the years. Each page was a memory, a piece of her life told through melody instead of words. For the first time, she wondered if it was time to share them. Over the next few days, things started moving faster than she expected. A local radio host reached out, asking if she would come in for an interview. Then a small music festival contacted her, inviting her to perform. The idea both thrilled and terrified her. She told herself she wasn't ready. She wasn't a performer. She was just someone who loved music. But the thought of turning down those chances made her heart ache. Deep down, she had waited her whole life for someone to hear her songs. Maybe this was her moment. Her co-workers encouraged her endlessly. They told every new customer proudly that the girl behind the counter was the one everyone was talking about. Sometimes she laughed about it, but part of her felt uneasy. The cafe had always been her safe place, her quiet corner of the world. Now it felt different. People didn't just see her anymore. They expected something from her. One evening after closing, the cafe owner sat down with her again. "You know," he said, "you don't have to keep working here if you want to chase this dream. We'll miss you, but I think you're meant for bigger things." She looked down at her hands. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted softly. He smiled. "Start by believing you deserve it." Those words stayed with her all night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened since that one night she'd gathered the courage to play. She thought about all the times she'd talked herself out of trying, all the chances she'd been too afraid to take. Maybe it was finally time to stop hiding. The next morning, she wrote a simple message on her phone. "Yes, I'd love to perform." She sent it to the festival organizer before she could change her mind. In the following weeks, she spent every spare minute practicing. Her small apartment echoed with music again, songs that had been silent for too long. Her neighbors sometimes stopped by to listen quietly through the open window. She didn't mind. It felt good to let her music breathe. When the day of the festival arrived, she was nervous but calm. The stage was bigger this time and the audience much larger than at the cafe. She stood backstage, clutching her violin tightly, taking deep breaths to steady her hands. The announcer called her name and she stepped into the bright lights. The crowd fell silent. For a moment, she just stood there looking out at the sea of faces. The same fear crept up her spine, the same doubt whispering in her ear. But then she remembered that night in the cafe, the warmth, the applause, the joy of finally being heard. She took a deep breath and began to play. The notes filled the air, rich and full of emotion. Every sound carried a piece of her story. Her struggles, her dreams, her hope. The audience was completely still, as if afraid to break the spell. When she finished, there was silence for a heartbeat, and then the entire crowd stood up in applause. Tears filled her eyes as she bowed deeply. For the first time, she didn't feel like a waitress pretending to be a musician. She was one. After the performance, people lined up to meet her. Reporters asked for interviews. Musicians offered to collaborate, and strangers simply thanked her for moving them. It was overwhelming, but in the best way. She realized that her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had listened and felt something real. As days passed, her life continued to change. She started receiving invitations from small venues around the city. She even uploaded a few of her recordings online, and they quickly gathered thousands of views. Comments poured in from people who said her music comforted them, inspired them, or made them cry. Reading their words brought her a quiet kind of happiness, but not everything was easy. The more attention she received, the more she missed the simple peace of her old life. She still worked at the cafe on some mornings, not because she needed the money, but because it grounded her. She liked greeting the regulars, wiping down tables, and hearing the soft clink of cups. It reminded her of where everything began. Sometimes she caught people secretly filming her or whispering when she passed by. Fame, even in its smallest form, had its price, but she tried not to let it change her. One rainy evening, as she was leaving the cafe, she saw a little girl standing by the window, watching her with wide eyes. The girl clutched a small violin case in her hands. "Are you the lady who played at the festival?" the girl asked shyly. She nodded with a smile. "Yes, that was me. I saw your video," the girl said. "You made me want to learn again. I gave up before, but now I want to try." Those simple words filled her heart more than any applause ever could. She knelt down beside the girl and said, "Don't stop playing no matter what anyone says. Music is the best way to tell your story." As she walked home that night, rain falling softly on the pavement, she realized that her journey wasn't just about success or recognition. It was about connection, about how one act of courage could ripple through other lives. Weeks turned into months, and she continued performing in small concerts and local shows. She wasn't chasing fame. She was following her passion, one step at a time. Still, whenever she returned to the cafe, she made sure to keep things normal. She laughed with her coworkers, served customers with the same kindness, and sometimes even hummed quietly as she worked. The people who knew her best didn't treat her like a celebrity. To them, she was still the same girl who poured coffee with a soft smile and found beauty in everyday life. One evening after closing time, she sat alone at one of the corner tables. The cafe was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of rain outside. She looked around the place that had once been her entire world. It had given her stability, comfort, and now, unexpectedly, it had given her a stage to start her new life. She took out her notebook again, flipping through the pages filled with handwritten notes and lyrics. Near the end, she found a blank page. She began to write a new piece, one that told her story not through sorrow or fear, but through gratitude. She called it The Beginning. Months passed like quiet music drifting through the air, calm but filled with meaning. The waitress who once worked behind the counter at a small cafe was no longer hidden. Her name had started to travel beyond the little town she came from. People spoke of her in places she had never been, and videos of her performances were shared by thousands online. Yet despite everything that had changed, she still felt like the same person who used to serve coffee with a soft smile and clean tables while humming to herself. Her days were busier now. Some mornings she still helped out at the cafe, not because she had to, but because it made her feel at home. The regular customers greeted her with warmth instead of awe. They treated her like family, and she loved that. But most of her days were now filled with music, practice sessions, recordings, and planning small concerts in nearby towns. She had begun to travel, taking her violin and stories wherever people wanted to listen. Sometimes she performed in cozy local halls, other times in outdoor spaces filled with airy lights and laughter. The sound of applause never stopped making her heart race. But it wasn't fame she was chasing. It was the feeling of connection, of touching hearts without saying a single word. Still, fame had its weight. There were times when she felt lost in it. Reporters wanted to know every detail about her life, and people expected her to always be perfect. When she wasn't performing, she sometimes sat alone in her small apartment, surrounded by sheet music, wondering if she could keep up with everything. One evening, she received an email that made her stop in surprise. It was an invitation from a well-known music organization in the city, asking her to perform at their annual gala. It wasn't just any event. It was one of the biggest gatherings for musicians, attended by famous artists and critics. Her first reaction was disbelief. Then came the fear. Could she really stand on a stage that grand? Could a simple girl from a cafe hold her own among trained professionals? For days she couldn't decide. She kept thinking back to the night she first performed in the cafe, the trembling hands, the nervous heart, and the silence that had turned into applause. Back then she hadn't known what would come next. Maybe this was another moment like that, one that could change everything. Finally, she said yes. The weeks leading up to the gala were full of preparation. She practiced every single day, sometimes until her fingers ached, but she didn't mind. The music was her voice and she wanted it to be honest. Her goal wasn't to impress. It was to tell her story one more time from the beginning until now. As the night of the performance approached, she grew quieter. Her co-workers noticed and one of them asked gently, "Are you nervous?" She smiled faintly. "A little," she admitted. "But it's a good kind of nervous. The kind that reminds me I care." The evening of the gala was beautiful. The concert hall shimmered with golden lights and the air was filled with soft chatter and anticipation. Musicians moved around with instruments polished to perfection, and elegant guests filled the seats. She stood backstage wearing a simple dress, holding her violin close to her heart. When her turn came, she stepped out under the bright lights. For a moment the sight took her breath away. The size of the hall, the quiet waiting faces, the soft glow that made everything feel dreamlike. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the world. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost fragile, like a whisper. But as the melody grew, so did her confidence. The song she chose wasn't famous or complicated. It was one of her own, something she had written long ago when she was still working long hours in the cafe, dreaming silently about a life she didn't believe she could have. Each sound that came from her violin carried a piece of her journey. The loneliness, the fear, the quiet moments of hope and the joy of finally being heard. The audience listened in stillness. Even the faintest breath seemed to pause in the room. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was deep and pure. Then came the applause, thunderous, standing, full of emotion. Tears welled in her eyes as she bowed. She hadn't just performed. She had shared herself. After the concert, people surrounded her with congratulations. A few famous musicians came to speak with her, praising her emotion and uniqueness. She was polite and thankful, but inside what touched her most wasn't their praise. It was the faces of ordinary people in the audience who had listened with tears in their eyes. Later that night, when she returned home, she placed her violin gently on the table and sat by the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the distance. She thought about how far she had come from the quiet cafe, how one small moment of courage had changed her life. But she also thought about balance. She didn't want to lose herself in success. Music had always been her way of expressing what was real, her truth, her emotions, her heart. That couldn't be replaced by fame or money. The next morning, she went back to the cafe as she often did after big performances. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and the sound of laughter made her smile. Her co-workers welcomed her back with cheers and hugs. "You were amazing," one of them said. "We saw the video online. It was beautiful." She laughed softly, a little embarrassed. "Thank you," she said. "It still doesn't feel real." She spent that day working behind the counter again, just like old times. Customers who recognized her asked for photos, but she never let it get in the way of her work. She poured coffee, wiped tables, and chatted with regulars like before. Later that afternoon, an elderly man entered the cafe. He was one of the regulars who had always come in quietly, ordering the same thing every day, a cup of black coffee and a slice of apple pie. He smiled when he saw her. "I watched you play last night," he said. "You reminded me of something important, that it's never too late to do what you love." His words made her pause. She realized that her story had become something bigger than herself. It wasn't just about a hidden musician anymore. It was about courage, about believing that even the quietest voices could be heard if they dared to speak. As the days turned into weeks, she continued performing. but she also began teaching. Once a week, she held small workshops for children who couldn't afford music lessons. She wanted to give them what she had once needed, someone to tell them they were good enough. The first day of her class, she looked at the group of bright young faces in front of her and smiled. Music isn't about being perfect, she told them. It's about being honest. It's how we tell our stories when words aren't enough. One little boy raised his hand and asked shyly, "Did you ever think about giving up?" She nodded gently. "Many times," she said, "but every time I wanted to stop, I remembered how music made me feel. It reminded me who I was." Over time, her students began to perform too, small concerts filled with laughter and nervous smiles. Watching them reminded her of her own beginnings, the trembling hands, the fear, the hope. It filled her with quiet pride. Years later, people would still tell her story. Some remembered her as the girl who worked in a cafe and stunned everyone with her music. Others knew her as a kind teacher who believed in every student who walked through her door. But to herself, she remained simple, a woman who had found peace in doing what she loved. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft orange light, she returned to the cafe again. It was quieter now, fewer customers, but still the same comforting warmth. She sat by the window, a cup of tea in her hand, watching the world outside. The cafe owner, older now, came over and sat with her. "You know," he said with a gentle smile, "I still remember the night you first played here. I didn't know it then, but that was the start of something beautiful." She smiled, her eyes soft. "It was the start of everything," she said. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft clatter of cups and the faint hum of a song playing from the radio. It was peaceful, ordinary in the best way. As the evening light faded, she looked around the cafe one more time. Every corner held a memory. The laughter, the long hours, the music that had once echoed here for the very first time. She realized that no matter how far she went, this place would always be her home. It wasn't just where her story began. It was where she found the courage to show the world who she truly was. And even now, when she picked up her violin, she still felt that same quiet heartbeat, that same spark that had guided her through everything. Because deep down, she knew one thing for certain: no matter how much the world changed around her, the music inside her would never fade.